Okay, so now we want to talk about something we can observe in a market called externality. And the important part of the word to notice is that it's external. There's something external to the participants in the market and their decision making. So what we can see then in a normal market with no externalities is we have our demand curve, which is our consumers taking into account the various additional benefits to buying the product. The supply curve has our additional or marginal costs. And so in a normal functioning market, no externality, one of the significant points of the market equilibrium is that this is where marginal cost for the consumers or the producer side is equal to the marginal benefit from the consumer side. And with an externality, what we're introducing is the idea that when the producer, I'm going to do a negative externality on the producer side first. When the producers are taking into account the costs of their business and figuring out that at this quantity my additional cost is at this level, so that's why I need to be paid that amount, and at this quantity I need to be paid at least this price to cover my marginal costs. That's all still true. The problem with an externality is there's something in their production process that is generating a cost to society, but it's not costing them. When they're doing their economic tally of costs, they don't see this as a cost. So they continue to operate on the supply curve that we have here. I'll just call that S1. But in reality, they're actually imposing a cost on society. And what most normally we can talk about as far as a negative externality would be some sort of bad. So we talk about producers making goods, right? Things we want to buy. Sometimes they actually produce bads, and pollution would certainly be one of them. Air pollution, water pollution, that sort of thing. So this would be one example of a negative externality. And so what's happening then is in the process of doing what they do to produce their good, they also are generating pollution. And it doesn't cost them anymore to generate the pollution. That's why they're not taking it into account as a cost. It's just a side effect of their production. And so when they're taking into account their private, we're going to actually call them the private marginal cost, this is where they're operating. This is how they are following the market signal, is to produce at that price and that quantity. With the negative externality, we want to introduce the idea that there are other costs that they should be taking into account because it's causing a problem for society. And so if they took in account an additional cost, it would shift the supply curve. So forgetting about externalities, pollution, all of that, just think about what we've learned about the supply curve. So one of the things then we learned about supply curves in Chapter 3, the factors that can shift it, one of them was the input price. And so at an input price, if it changes, one of the materials they're using, something they're using in the process of production, if its price were to increase, then when you're answering the question, what quantity are you willing to supply at a particular price, it used to be this quantity, but now that prices are higher for my inputs, I'm only going to do this quantity. And at this price, it used to be this quantity, but now it's this one. And so we end up, when we have a higher input cost, with our supply curve shifting to the left, decreasing, right? That's what we learned. And so I'm saying that because it's similar to understanding what's happening to show the impact of an externality. Essentially, there is a cost of an input that, if they took it into account, would result in a supply curve taking into account all their costs. And so what we say then is the S2 that I just drew there would include our social marginal costs, whereas our original one, the one that the producer is thinking about and making his decision, is only taking into account his private marginal costs. And so what that means then is the producer is acting as if this is the true cost of his production and choosing to make P star Q star, but from society's point of view, that's not all the cost. From society's point of view, he should be operating on the social marginal cost, and be at that higher price and lower quantities. This would be quantity social cost, and this would be price for the social cost. All right. So what I want you to take from this is an understanding that there can be situations, they're called market failure, that the market left to its own devices is not taking into account all the cost of production. And so we end up with an overproduction from society's point of view. How do we go about fixing it? One of the common theories that is offered is we need to make them internalize this cost, right? If it's an external cost right now, find a way to make them internalize it, and then they will operate as if they're on this S2 curve and take into account all the costs. And so that's why you'll see suggestions for taxing industries that produce pollution, whether it's air pollution or water pollution. All of those ideas are ways to make the accidental side effect pollution that's not being accounted for in their production costs actually feel that cost and thereby internalize the externality, and then that would hopefully push us towards a more socially beneficial output level. So that's your negative externality. Now we want to take a minute and look at the positive externalities. Okay, so with the negative externality, it was showing us producers, the supply side, not taking into account all the costs. With a positive externality, we're going to be on the demand side. We're going to see that consumers are not taking into account all the possible benefits to society. All right, so again, then we have our demand curve representing the additional benefit to the consumers for any particular quantity, just like the supply side was the additional cost to the producers for any particular quantity. And so what we're saying with the positive externality is without any intervention from the outside, we are going to find them producing at the equilibrium Q star and the price P star. And normally that's fine when there's no externality. But when there's an externality, what's happening is the consumers are not taking into account all the benefits. So this is the additional benefit to the consumer for this quantity, and this is additional benefit to them for this quantity. But there's actually some other benefit this product is providing them. And a common example for positive externality would be college. The idea is that when a consumer or student goes to school, they're doing it because obviously it's bringing them some benefit. They have personal benefit they'll get for having their college degree. But that's not the end of the story. All of society benefits when the people in it are improving their human capital, when they're gaining more skills and knowledge. And so there's an additional benefit to society for someone to get their college degree. So now when we look at a particular price and we say this is additional benefit to the person or individuals, there's also even more benefit to society. So at every price, the true social marginal benefit is going to be represented by a demand curve that shifts to the right. So this first one I'll call D1, and it is your private marginal benefit. And this new one is D2, and it takes account your social marginal benefit. Okay? So what's the result of all of this is if we don't do anything, if we just let the market do what it's going to do, in this case of market failure, you will end up at P star and Q star. If we were to intervene in some way, according to society, we should be at this higher quantity, quantity, social, marginal benefit, and we should also be at the higher price. Well, we may not be loving the higher price, but what's important with the positive externalities, without any sort of intervention, we're going to end up underproducing a good because people are basing their decision, they're facing all the costs themselves, and they're basing it against their benefit, and so that's going to put them at this point. But if they could somehow internalize all the benefit that society is getting, then they would buy more of this good. They'd be a higher quantity being purchased, higher equilibrium quantity. So how do you internalize something like the social benefit of college? This is where you get the argument for subsidies for college, that we should give loans at better rates or grants and that sort of thing, is that there's a benefit to society to encourage people to go to college. And so by doing these various ways of giving money, it's a way of increasing the demand towards the direction of being on the social benefit of demand. So then, summing up, with negative externalities, it affects the supply curve. It's the true cost is actually a supply curve to the left, and the way to make them internalize it is to tax them the amount of that cost that they're not internalizing. With the positive externality, we see that it is the people not taking into account, the consumers not taking into account all the benefits, and the way to make them internalize the benefit is to give them a subsidy and to try and push them onto the social marginal benefit, in this case, this curve right here. The source of externalities, why do they happen, why do we sometimes have market failure, is generally market failure. I already said that, is generally lack of property rights. And so if you look in the case of the pollution on the negative externality, the reason that they were able to pollute without it costing them anything is the pollution is just going into the air or it's just going into the water. And there's no owner of the air or the water saying, hey, excuse me, you're going to have to reimburse me for the damage you're causing. So it's the lack of property rights that tends to lead to this market failure. And so that can be also an argument for the government intervention to try to come in and solve it. There are economists that don't think that this market failure is as prevalent as some economists do. Once again, there is controversy. But just so you understand the various arguments behind the externality, you're going to want to understand why there are some who are arguing that we should do some sort of taxation type policy to deal with pollution, to deal with negative externalities, and while you'll hear some argue for subsidies for things they want to encourage, like college education.